lava pool stuff. Was that the time when all the boys were hanging out and playing different stuff? Now I'm older, is less than that for sure. I see. Oh, I didn't realize this can appear like here. Yeah, when all the boys were playing different stuff, huh? What do they play now? I mean, you could enjoy this experience again, not like this specific experience, but you can certainly hook up with your boys and play Baldur's Gate 3. It requires less, like, since this is a live service game, if you want something that has more of a finite, closed off system to hang out with a bunch of peeps, you know, CRPGs are around the corner, and especially for D&D, you can... Baldur's Gate 3 is a very appropriate format. Live service games require, you know, daily maintenance, so when one gets older and have priorities, when one has priorities, you know, a family, growing older, all the boys do be having jobs and their families and whatnot, it can be very difficult to keep up with a live service game if you're playing together. Oh, Lost Ark, how was that? You went way too ham. That's understandable. Lost Ark is upholds the Korean standard, right? So it's less lax than even the Japanese standards. And then Western standards are the most laxed. So things that are owned by Wizard of Coast is the live service, like we had to take into account like the living culture, right? So the living culture in Western culturalism is, you know, a little bit more luxurious, and convenience comes first a lot more. And then you have Japanese, which is laxing up a little bit to be more receptive to the international crowd. And then Koreans are at the top. KMMORPGs are, I don't think they're laxing up that much. Japanese live service games, like I play a Japanese live service game called PSO2 NGS. They're laxing up too. Yeah, Blue Protocol is around the corner. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Japan's developers, like the bigger publishers, are setting a little trend of being a little bit more receptive to a Western audience. So when it comes to the Western audience, you typically focus on accessibility, right? That is the current trend. So Capcom is becoming their golden period again, because a lot of their designs is emphasizing accessibility, and that bleeds into every other design which deals with like MMOs and whatnot. So I would say Japan is laxing up quite a bit to kind of make it so that even Western audiences like, you know, it's not as bad, right? But Korean MMOs, like BDO, what was the studio called? Abyssal Studio or something? Oh, BDO. Oh, Pearl Abyss. That's right, Pearl Abyss. Yeah. Ooh. The design language from Korean studios are still really tough. And when I mean by really tough, I mean I'm an American, so I'm from the United States, and my standards kind of fluctuate between Japanese standards right now, Japanese expectation standards, and United States or like Western European kind of studios. So it's anywhere between Neverwinter and more or less what Sega puts out right now. My last Korean MMO was a game called Atlantica Online. It was eventually purchased by Nexon. The game is still going. I played for 10 years. It was after my World of Warcraft days. And it was like, we're talking about, it was designed for you to keep your computer on. Like, I was still in college then, and leaving out of college, I just put my laptop upside down and it just keeps it running because of auto crafting. Because you have to auto craft, so you're more or less, I mean, you might as well, you know, mine cryptocurrency at that rate. you you might as well just set your computer to mining cryptocurrency instead of using it for the game. Oh, I keep going back and forth between 2 points. I need to go up here. Yeah, so I'm not sure if Korean designers gonna dip down, but it's nice to have options. So I'm not saying I'm not suggesting it's a bad or a good thing. You know, you have to know what your expectations are in the industry. So if you're a person who loves to be like top of the top, sweat, hard work, makes the merit feel good, definitely consider a Korean MMO. I like the grind, but yes, it is very well put. Very well put. It's prohibitively, yeah, it's very tough if your experience requires friends. Like, yeah, exactly. It's so difficult. It's one of those things when someone says, "Hey, you want to start Lost Ark? Do you want to sign a blood pack that you can guarantee me that we both put in 10 hours every single day from now on?" Like, do you want to make a schedule where we have like a homework session? So you better be putting in like 2 or 3 hours every day, because like if we really want to enjoy and keep on top of this, we have to make a pact right now at this moment. If you're suggesting a Korean MMO, you gotta know what you're getting yourself into. Oh, also make sure to change from a full-time job to a part-time job. Maybe supplement it with like content creation. Because you're gonna need some way of killing 2 birds with 1 stone here. You gotta maximize, you gotta understand that Korean live service games are a job. Oh, sorry, had all the horizontal progression too, like giant, yeah. Yep. Do they have seasonal resets? I think an interesting middle ground would be something like Activision Blizzard's approach to like Diablo 4, where they do like Rift seasonals, right? Or like they introduce like a seasonal rotation, so there's like a reset at some point. So if you miss the boat, you come on, you game hard for like 2 or 3 months, then the feeling of keeping it up and jumping back and forth, you know, leaving and coming back for short bursts like summer vacation or something like that, or Christmas vacation, something like that. It's a good middle ground with like the whole seasonal reset. So lots of Western developers like to focus on seasonal resets. Oh, BDO does? Oh, that's nice. That's not bad. It's kind of a middle ground, because say you like, oh, you just want to take a break from your career or something, right? And then, yeah, you can take certain items with you back to, oh, okay, I see. Interesting. Yeah. That's a good middle ground. Yeah, I like that design. It's like trying to bridge the incredibly hard work makes the wheel work kind of thing. I don't know what that idiom is anymore. Like hard work makes the grease, you know, like make the wheel spin well kind of thing, compared to the convenience, I want to do little at a time kind of thing. I'm a little at a time kind of person. It's like going on a jog. Playing Neverwinter online is going on a jog. Every morning I get up, I go for a 30-minute run. That's how Neverwinter feels. That's the Western. I feel like that's the most appropriate Western expectation nowadays. Leaving them untradeable avoids ticking off all the people who did it. Yeah, exactly. It's trying to bridge 2 gaps, right? Like, for the longest time, those 2 audiences tend to be separate, right? But now the great compromise is the focus on account bound stuff, right? And maybe some period that the skilled people get to exercise their experience, and then another period, a lull period, that allows to recruit and expand to increase player base, and then it keeps cycling between the two. The game will healthily cycle between the two, and it allows it's a good compromise, I would say, for both the developers' mental health, the publishers' monetary pressure, and the communities that needs to both be used to seeing new players and also used to getting those new players to become experienced players. Like, if it's too hard one way or the other, the game kind of becomes a closed off system. And when the game becomes a closed off system, you hope that the IP survives, as in, like, the publishers are willing to invest IP. Like, for this game, they're kind of doing that a little bit, but they don't really have to, because Wizard of Coast, right? Their IP is doing quite well. So there's not as much publisher pressure to have to solve these design choices. Unlike BDO, which Pearl Abyss, I'm pretty sure, is self-published. Maybe not. They might be owned by a bigger corporation. But I'm pretty sure Pearl Abyss is self-published. So they call, like, unilaterally trying to preserve and expand their game as much as possible. I think another good example would probably be like Guild Wars or something. Sega is another one, since they own PSO2 online. It's fun seeing all the different models. It's good to know. It's good to know about models and philosophies and the creators' philosophies. Then you won't get into trap where you, like, love a game, but then you love to hate its politics or love to hate its philosophy when it's too late. Like, you've gone in so deep that you just love to hate what you like. It's always nice to be able to float somewhat off of IP popular, like you said, like this, where, yeah, it really is. One must temper your expectations, right? When you're floating off a successful IP, you have to understand that it can stunt growth and whatnot, but it can also provide a very comforting thing. Like, hey, you like chocolate ice cream. You're not pressured to change that chocolate ice cream. At least, not by much. And chocolate ice cream has a legacy. It's great. So when someone put out chocolate ice cream, well, it's still kind of hard to fail overall to sell chocolate ice cream. That's a really blanketed statement, but or like a blanketed analogy, because we're choosing food now, which is a bit more of a staple. My family used to work in the food industry. Yeah. Like, tomorrow I decided I'm gonna buy an ice cream machine, and I'm gonna go to the park, right? Buy a small portable, like, battery powered chilling device, and I'm gonna sit at the park in the summertime, and I'm gonna sell chocolate ice cream. And the more labor I put into it, the more I can get back in profitability. So my margins can be lower the more labor I put into it. That kind of thing. And right now, what Wizard of Coast has with D&D is kind of like that. It's the IP itself is sentimental enough to hold it up. It's kind of a nice time to be a fan of D&D. I'm not like in the market to play a CRPG as of late. Obviously, Cryptic doesn't make a CRPG. This is an action MMO, right? But you know, I feel very happy and like good for the people who do like CRPGs and Dungeons and Dragons, especially D&D 5th edition. Crazy times, man. Who would have thought? Larian Studios really did it. I played Divinity 2, which was their you mean Divinity Original Sin 2? I think. I'm not sure they made Divinity 2. They might have also made Divinity 2 as well. Yeah, there's another series of games that go by Divinity. I don't know if they made those. If they did, then it's a non-issue because it could be both. Yeah, they did really well. I think Larian has really captured the essence of D&D, at least from my cursory understanding. I watch a lot of essays. Like I follow lots of people who make game essays. I'm a fan of understanding philosophy and psychology behind the creative process, or consumer and business stuff. I consume video games for the sake of my having anecdotal experience, but generally speaking, it's fun watching people talk about their feelings and stuff when it comes to video games. Business practices predominantly. It was honestly begging for a translation in D&D. The framework is perfect with how much freedom you have. Absolutely. Right now, Larian Studios is running a tear into industry standards, right? And I can see it bringing up a lot of old hat controversies about one-off games. Like a lot of times, if you're someone who works in the industry, well, I wouldn't say salty. I think it's a big concern. It's a big psychological concern. So hear me out here, I suppose. I've been delving into essays about social standards and then industry standards, like creative standards. And I can meet halfway, or like not even halfway. I can just provide a more comprehensive perspective on this. So it's not very it's more, I guess I would say it's more of a standardization concern than it is a emotional feeling, like a competitive feeling thing. So it really mirrors back in the day when, like, what was the last time this happened, right? When was last time one-off game that excelled at its scope? And what happened with the mentality of the psychology behind consumerism, like the people who consume games, such as myself, and how did that affect the perception of game standards and monetization of game standards? The last time that happened was FromSoft with Dark Souls 1. Or you could even make an argument a little before that, or around that time. Let's pick something even more familiar, right? The Witcher 3 game by CDPR. When stuff like that happens, it's often through a period of non-compete during the game's release. So like Witcher 3 stood as a singular thing. So the when you standardize to one product, just like one outstanding product, which they deserve all the success that comes with it, absolutely. We're merely considering the psychology behind having a singular dominant product as a representation of psychological standards. And Baldur's Gate 3 might actually be one that is going to set the next conscious standards. So the comments that the developers are talking about, like the criticisms, right? Certainly they might seem emotionally charged, but the concern is when you set a standard like that, how does it impact the well-being of consumerism in the field? Well, setting it too high is the primary, and I feel like it wasn't Baldur's Gate in early access for it was for 3 years, yes. Conceptually, the average length of early access games that end up exploding onto the field in early access, it's around 3 years, 3 to 4 years. So it has a pretty standard matriculation time for an early access game. The idea is so it's setting a standard that doesn't have explicit backgrounds. Like, for example, when you buy Baldur's Gate 3, when it's launched, we're talking about the early access period. We have perspective, right, on how long its development cycle was, and it was actively developed. But when that does not account for the majority of players that see the game, like their favorite influencer came out, and maybe even their favorite influencer was unaware of how much money, right? How much money, time, and stuff was invested into producing a game of that scope. What they can see is a price tag of $60. But they see a product that completely blows out the gold standard, or like quote unquote gold standard, or even acceptable standards of the development side, like the development in general. So when that is uncontested, like say in the calendar year, you are uncontested, and then at the end of the year where all the awards and accolades come up, a singular game becomes uncontested. Whether we like to have perspective or not, emotionally and psychologically, that ends up becoming a standard. The dangers, I come from a science background, right? So a lot of times when I see an example that people start emotionally standardized psychologically, as you know, a sample of one becomes incredibly dangerous and harmful to even the people who enjoy it. A great example is a whole generation of people who constantly thinks there's nothing rewarding in gaming other than a Souls game. What that means is, it's not that these people are incapable of enjoying other types of games. It's psychologically, for a period of time, the gold standard of like whatever their psychological feedback is to be popular, to be relevant, to empathize with most gamers, was Souls games. What that does, and why I feel I can empathize with the developer's concern, maybe they didn't use a lot of tact to express this openly in a understandable way, is that it's going to create enrichment for an expectation, and it buries the other game industry people. So what I mean is, the success of Baldur's Gate 3 can be wild, but what if you're a developer that doesn't want to make a Baldur's Gate 3? That's what happened the last time this happened. FromSoft did that. So then it leads to fatigue, and it leads to a lot of reverse sentiments. Like Neo, you know, all of Team Ninja's games that mirrored FromSoft designs, like tons of Souls-like games. And as a content creator, I guess I'll consider myself a content creator, right? I'm afraid it's creating a psychological standard, and quality is an emotional standard themselves. I would like, gaming has become very trendy, like it's a trend-based stuff. But back in the day, I feel like what they're trying to express is, I hope that because of Baldur's Gate 3's success, we can still make the game we want to make, and that it wouldn't draw comparisons to Baldur's Gate 3. And unfortunately, as much as that seemed like, nah, that won't happen, I have heard the most craziest comparisons. Like, Hades is just like a Souls-like game. And that type of thing, it stunts innovation. It also scares developers and pressures developers to have to sell out to publishers. Yeah, some people compare, right, but now this situation, it's not just some people. It's the vast majority of people, right? And it's enough to drive publishers to put a halt to any idea outside of the trending product. And it's become so pervasive that I resonate with the developers that hope that it doesn't usher in another period that's happened. And from a consumer standpoint, right, from me, or a content standpoint, or someone who commentates on trends a lot of times, I can tell you that if I had $1 for every time someone asked me, are you going to play a Souls game while I'm playing Slay the Spire or something, this might end up happening with Baldur's Gate 3. So, is that going to create a resurgence of CRPGs, or everyone creating subconscious changes, like comparison to a value of standard, even though they're not relevant? It can. Like, it can, to the point where you're gonna have like a developer that spend millions. Yeah, the comparison apocalypse. And they're not gonna be relevant. Like, they don't, and we're talking about psychologically, emotionally, not rationally. So while we can tell ourselves, hey, I believe most human beings can say things like, yeah, this is not a Souls game, so why am I making that comparison? It's fair intellectually, but it doesn't stop you from feeling like you got gypped. You see what I mean? Like, buyer's perspective, developer's perspective, or publisher's perspective, it's like, I'm spending $60 on this game, and if you are a Baldur's Gate 3 fan, you'll start to think, yeah, but what is the scope limit of $60? If it's Larian Games, oh no. I think, as passionate people, I believe in the developers who want to make games of their own vision, but if they always have to meet a lofty scope that is unemotionally compromised comparison between two games that are unrelated, that kind of sucks as a creator, I would say. Like, it's kind of like one of those things where you open a business, like you want to start an online commerce business, but everyone's gold standard is Amazon. And if it becomes big enough, you don't have a shot before you even start. So you have to try to innovate, right? You have to try to produce something that Amazon can't produce. What, that just sounds like a monopoly dominance. And I'm not saying, I'm trying not to make it sound like Larian should put out a statement or something. They deserve all their... It is. And I yeah, and one of the things is, yes, it's very fair to say, well, they want to keep standards low so they can meet them, right? For example, like one of the bigger counter arguments, like, oh yeah, these people are salty because the projects they have might not meet the scope of Larian's scope in a reasonable time and offer like certain things, like, but it's not that. It's the concern is building an expectation that was unintended. And I don't think Larian, I don't know if Larian will put out a statement. It's like acknowledging like, oh yeah, it was a long years, many hard times, and this also fits into the scope of other developers. The last thing we want to do is make enemies of our colleagues, right? So it would be great to have like a collaborative communication where people say like, yeah, you know, these games still cost a lot and you have to wait a certain amount. Here's some transparency so that the next time you go and buy a game, you're not going to say, why can't I have 3,000 hours of content for $60? Just like that, all the time. And I don't think it's necessary a win-lose. I think it's a win-win a lot of times when you have emotional expectations meet your intellectual expectations. For all the success of a breakout hit like Baldur's Gate 3 comes with a lot of emotional biases that may not be made apparent to young people. I would say here's one that I can share anecdotally. FromSoft was so great, in my opinion, in their one dominant area that there's a whole generation of young players who cannot dispel and enjoy breaking away from FromSoft's design. And I'm saying this from more of a casual mentoring guy to say that actually creates a psychological dependency on specific stimuli. If you're a person who uses gaming as a form of coping and escapism, and you have conditioned yourself to a gold standard that's arbitrarily overrepresented by a design, those kids end up spending a lot of time trying to recondition and enjoy anything else. And that's kind of the more of the meta stuff that I talk about a lot. And that's why I focus a lot on explaining what a Korean MMO is, right? What a Japanese MMO is like, what a Western MMO is like. It helps to know these things. And I hope that Baldur's Gate 3, for all its success and stuff, doesn't stymie the creativity with the business practice of what sells. It's like, I'm all for that. I'm a Western fantasy fan. However, you gotta admit that every corner you look at in whichever industry, there's a Western fantasy thing happening, like all in your face. So I start thinking like, when am I gonna? So are all the sci-fi projects being canceled or being delayed because business practices have to line up with consumer sentiments, right? So D&D is doing really well. But now what happens to everything else that doesn't do very well because of the allure of algorithm-based trending stuff, right? Are we going to see science fiction for a while? That kind of thing. And to me, I think, personally, to be very rational to the people who are salty, right? The developers who are raising a funk about it. I see people who maybe are like 5 or 6 years in the making of their game that's about to come out, and they realized that, boy, this would be a really bad time to release a game that isn't like Baldur's Gate 3. We've seen this before. FromSoft games literally push other games away in their release window because of how consumerism created gold standards for themselves. And then that is a feedback loop. When a gold standard sits uncontested, they continue to create that same one, which stunts creativity, right? It stunts creativity, but it certainly drives up a consumerism like frenzy. It gets people to keep buying the same products for a really extended amount of time, and it's good for business, certainly. It's not necessarily good for creativity. So as a developer group, you can kind of empathize with stunted creativity. We could use a different type of analogy to this. Content creation on YouTube. When something trends, it is very difficult to go against that trend. And gaming consumerism is very similar now. So Baldur's Gate 3 has the entire backing of the Wizard of Coast trend, the D&D trend, all the critics, a unanimous glowing backing of the greater extended community, and the vast majority of influencers. So without tapping into the psychology or the danger of this, it's difficult to see the developers in the light of being concerned for their creative freedom. One thing to illustrate this is kind of like a studio that becomes very popular for a thing under a publisher, and that publisher strong arms the studio to continue making the same product, right? Iterate on the same product against their wishes. Like, so what would happen is that studio leave, or the creators leave the studio behind and take risks again until they get their product. For myself as a creative person, or like I like to consider myself, I guess, remotely creative, I like to take that sentiment, that stance where when something becomes overtly popular, uncontested, it will habitually set a gold standard that lots of people will love for a while, but it will also destroy the creative liberties, or it will outcompete the creative liberties of anyone who's in a creative competitive process. I think the soulsification of the industry for a long while was a good parody for the concern. Yeah, it is. Before Souls was Ubisoft. Ubisoft's Assassin's Creed, which led to the dawn of the open world craze and then Ubisoft fatigued out, right? So everyone started adding more. The worlds had to be bigger in scope, but it had the cloning process and the checklist and stuff. It expanded and it continued to fatigue. Another great one is the Marvel universe, the MCU. Disney's thing. It is great when it is uncontested. Like, it is incredible when it's uncontested and everyone mirrors it. To me, if you're a fan, you're gonna drink it up. You're gonna drink it up until you're like, you know, ODing, right? ODing on it. But if you're not a fan, you're gonna be swarmed with all that stimuli, and you're constantly looking for something else. In that time, literally anything that was not the MCU goes on their merits alone, but they're not lucrative, or they're not relatively lucrative. And that's what the developers are worried about, in my opinion. Like, because they're not lucrative, publishers will see less likely to invest in their projects. So for example, if you pitched a science fiction game I doubt you will get more peaked than pitching a D&D game due to the trend. And in the time of FromSoft, the soulsification of the game industry, if you pitch a Souls-like game, you are more likely to draw more attention than, like, lucratively, like business model wise, because a business operates on statistics, right? It operates on precedence in order to make safe investments or hedging investments. Yeah. And it sucks. It's kind of a duality of the human condition all the time, right? Creativity, in order to be creative, you take risks and they're unrefined. But when you want to refine and become standardized, you iterate and continue to refine it. A great example in technology is Apple's ecosystem or Google's ecosystem, Samsung. Any ecosystem that is constantly refining, uncontested. Apple is refining because it's uncontested. So creativity takes, and innovation takes a hit for uncontested refinement. So it becomes standardized. And developers are thinking, we're in the golden age of gaming, I would say. The second coming of golden age of gaming in general. So at a time like this, it's worth opening a dialogue about the popularity and the driving force against creativity when an uncontested gold standard shows up. Like Nintendo has many examples of uncontested standards. So Nintendo sets the standards for their own games because they're in a closed ecosystem. And if you think about it, it's great that they stay creative, even uncontested, but they don't necessarily have to, right? They don't necessarily have to be creative. If you're in a non-competitive state, you can keep going about your things. So what we're saying here is, I don't believe Lorien is in the state where they would just pull an Activision or like a publisher's opportunism where they capitalize on. I think Baldur's Gate 3 is worth noting that it is a one-off fantastic CRPG, and it's not gonna say, I don't think they're making a statement like, hey, you should make like games like us, and everyone should make like their own version of Baldur's Gate 3. Is, we love this game, we made this game, please go on and make your other games. Please go on to make something that is great, but at the same time, you have to convince all the fans that is worth investing in other games anymore. I play a game that is, because I play a game series in my last like 3 or 4 months that's becoming mainstream soonish, right? It's becoming bigger. And what happens is, I hope everyone else, all the other developers, continue to make their own games so that there's different creativities going on. But when a game takes off so hard, pragmatically speaking, it's very difficult to not want to try to capitalize on that if you're a businessman. And then the creative people suffers for it, in my opinion. They get restricted for it. Like, they cannot pitch games when there's a gold mine sitting in front of them. So it sucks because there are things like, Elden Ring is Elden Ring is releasing in July. All right, guys, real talk. We're gonna push all the launch games around Elden Ring. That's the repeated process that I feel must be reached. That concern must be reached here. Like, it would be great if there are like 4 or 5 wonderful games that happen in a short period of time within each other, so that it gives the psychology of consumers to understand that, hey, It's not one of them, it's a lot of them. And you want to celebrate creativity. But if one creator excels beyond another, whether unintentionally or not, it creates a psychological bias that honestly ends up hurting everyone. Everyone gets a big thing. Like, while you're enjoying this stuff, you realize that as a creator, like if you're a game developer, you are in a tough spot if you're not making a Baldur's Gate 3 thing. Like if you're not making a D&D game right now, you're in a tough spot. Like monetarily. You would have to pick up a publisher who's willing to invest in a game that isn't making millions and shattering records. And that's what happened when Souls took off. Like, what are you gonna make? It's like, hey, can I hire you? Are you making a Souls game? Like, we want you to make a Souls game. Like, you know what? Drop what you're doing. Souls games are all the rage. Let's get more Souls games. Kids can't have enough of this because FromSoft set a standard, and we're all gonna try to meet it. When Assassin's Creed came out, Ubisoft, they know where it's at. Let's make a game like that. Oh heck, we have Far Cry. Let's make it just like that. Let's keep on accentuating the standards. Baldur's Gate 3 then becomes less and less unique, right? But I don't think that's a desirable consequence of developers. If I was an artist, right? It happened in the art, like right now it's happening in the art world, you know, with the whole AI explosion and whatnot, where if you start to standardize expectations, all the art is going to start to look the same. Because as much as an artist wants to succeed doing their own thing, they have to get paid somehow, or they have to make money somehow to sustain their thing. Yeah, make more Marvel movies. That's exactly what for me, I'm saying this romantically. I know for a fact that I am guilty of privilege. I'm guilty of privilege, guilty of accessibility, and guilty of being in the creative field for most of the time. Like, I'm a creative problem solver most of the time. So I have these social biases, but I do, because of these social biases, I look specifically from a perspective of creative liberties. And business practices are what I study most of the time because I don't think like a business, like I don't emotionally feel like a businessman most of the time. But when it comes to business, if something succeeds uncontested, you bet your balls, you put your money on that product. And when you put your money on that product, no matter how intellectually how you are, if a bunch of products like that show up, psychologically being exposed and saturated to that type of product makes you think that is the only product that is worth high quality investments. Like, it is essence of high quality. Marvel, Disney did so well at marvelizing cinema for a really long time. And if you like Marvel films, you know what I mean. You are addicted as heck. I was on the train for like maybe a solid phase 1 and phase 2. And now it's moving on. So do we really want to go through all this training, like going on trains? I don't know. As a creative person, like if you're in the creative arts, you kind of don't want that, right? You want your product to stand as a welcome breath of fresh air. But understanding how human psychology works, it doesn't work that way most of the time. Mere exposure and inundation for something that's great, and you see it rapidly over and over again, will make that the standard form of quality. So you psychologically will be not be receptive to something different for a long while. And the stronger, the bigger force it is, that's what created Marvelization, Soulification. What's another great FGC fighting games in the 90s? Fighting games in the 90s, man. Fighting games. SNK, Capcom, even Sega, and I'm missing one. Bandai, or was it Namco who owned it? Tekken. Like 90s, it was a fighting game every single year. Like almost every single year. And then there was like a remix or a remaster of a fighting game within the calendar year. It was, if you're not a fighting game, you're not a gamer. If you didn't play fighting games, you're not a gamer. So that kind of thing. And then let's not forget, there's another recent one, BR, right? BRs, battle royales. Like, I got a battle royale, you get a battle royale. How do we convert this into a battle royale? And I was not a battle royale person, so it was hard. It creatively, if you're outside the out group, if you're in the out group, you can't get into the same addiction, right? You can't get in on the bandwagon. For a creator, if your job is in that creative field, you can't help but have a uphill battle. Some people rise to the challenge, absolutely. So like, when you rise to the challenge, you swap the trend, right? You fight the trend. Even the subset of that BRization with how hugely, yeah, Fortnite, yep, still powerhouse. But for me as a pragmatist, I guess, I will try to exercise some pragmatic, but it's kind of idealistic, so it's probably less pragmatic, is that it is always worth trying to provide perspective of one's own likes and dislikes psychologically in order to keep human creativity intact. It's great to be very, very good at things like, and stay in the box. To me, I like gaming because it's a creative platform, right? And as much as I am so floored that Lorien Studios will probably, hot take, compete and take a Game of the Year award from Legend of Zelda, right? From Zelda. It's about time there's a similar calendar year that has a really unrelated competition. But here's the downside of all this. Zelda is in a non-compete closed ecosystem. So is Lorien Games. Like, they don't cross with each other. So at the same time, whatever they're duking out, it's hard to even say that they're not gonna just go about and create their own sphere of influence, unintentionally or intentionally. And it's not in the control of the developers. I think that's the biggest fear here, or the fear from the creative standpoint, and from their bosses, you know, the people who are paying the bills and whatnot. You can't control. It's hard to control consumerism's selective bias towards a gold standard, like a glowing thing. And Zelda, right? When Zelda comes out, Game of the Year. It doesn't. If the Game Awards won't give Zelda the Game of the Year, all the Nintendo outlets will. When you buy a new iPhone, it is the best iPhone that has ever graced the planet. That's all you need to know. Is it 1% better? It's still the best iPhone that it's ever been. Right? So, closed ecosystem. And Lorien managed to do it with CRPGs. It's uncontested. What is Obsidian gonna do? What is anyone who's not gonna write a D&D script for a CRPG going to do? That's gonna be tough for them. Like, yeah, you know, I don't want to make light of how long Lorien Games have worked on Baldur's Gate 3, but just for every one of those early access games that have gone for 3 to 4 years, there are also probably other games that have gone for 3 to 4 plus years. If not, usually it's like, I would say it's getting higher. It's like 5 or 6 years. And those guys are like, should we even release our game right now? Like, should we wait? How long should we wait before the whole, like, you know, before Baldur's Gate 3, like, makes enough space? And it's not fair to the developer either. They deserve all the fame and all the hard work speaks for itself. And that's great to be successful like that. At the same time, you kind of start feeling, if you were a creator, right? I would say they would be easily able to empathize if they failed. Say if they failed, that they would like the idea that someone else's success becomes part of their success too. So, my hot take here is I hope everyone decides to continue playing other games. I hope they still make room in their hearts for a non-D&D CRPG game, or a non-Baldur's Gate 3 CRPG game, or even not a CRPG game. And it is quite salty. I would say it's salty and scary. Like, when someone is incredibly successful and you happen to work in that field, it's hard not to feel a little hopeless or concerned, right? I've been working, like, hypothetically, I've been working on this secret sauce. Like, it's so good. Like, I think it's so good. But right before, like a month before my launch, the best sauce in the world just like went viral. What are your chances that your sauce, and then you look at it, it's like, oh man, it's not like that sauce. So what do I do? How do I pitch that my sauce is nothing, like, not really like the OP sauce that's on the market right now? How do I get people to try my sauce? It's tough. It's a tough question. And all the usual suspects came out to produce some criticism. And I think it was taken in a very malicious, cynical way. And it's taking like the fan base interpreted as a business move, as opposed to a creative move. And I would like to argue it's probably both. It's just that it's overrepresented by the business move. Basically, what they say is like, oh yeah, they want to downplay Baldur's Gate 3 because if they release their game, they want to have some hype too. Because if Baldur's Gate 3 takes all the hype, they're not going to be able to make money. Or like, the game isn't going to be as attractive. Or they want to lower the standards so they save money and produce more cash grabs and whatnot. That's got plenty of representation. All fair points. Fair enough. All emotional points. I respect that. Another perspective is not being represented though. Like another big perspective, which is the fear that creative liberties are gone. So like if CDPR comes out with the new Witcher game, do they adopt designs that Lorien created just so that it falls in line with standards? That's what happened in like the last 10 years of gaming. And let's not talk about the remake apocalypse. Or the remastering trend that we have right now by iterating and cycling through an old trend, right? That's also a thing. Like, oh, you know what? That's a great idea. We should do that. That's a great idea. We should do that. But here's a big catch though. The nice thing is remakes are bound by their IP, right? The IP that they own. So the remakes are still a little bit more flexing. And here's a really big silver lining. The way you can know that a specific psychology or a specific product still has creative liberties is that overall, people are taking L's and W's, but they're not losing the ability to experiment. So when you get L's and W's and inconsistencies, creative liberties are still there. Unfortunately, from a business standpoint, creativity means monetary risks. So it's always a duality between them. Like, for example, there are remakes that land flat. There are remakes that do well, right? Because it's bound by their IPs, and their IPs allow creative liberties. From a business standpoint, if you want to be creative, that's a monetary risk. So when something is super successful, it almost seems too big to fail. Congrats, Lorien Games. I feel it's worth making sure to balance the positivity with concerns, right? And then balance concerns with positivity. I think Lorien might have become the new Eeps, unintentionally or intentionally. I don't know if they want this title, but they've become the new, possibly too big to fail standard. Whether they like it or not, they can embrace it, but they can also be very open about their colleagues, their competition. Like for me, gaming as a consumer, you get less variety when a powerhouse dominates, right? What do we usually call them in business? A monopoly. So when it approaches that, or it has the early signs, right? Larian gets to choose if they do that, because they're self-published, which is so incredible. But when was the last time it led to a proper feedback loop on itself that created disaster? I don't have to tell you about CDPR Cyberpunk 2077. I still love the game, by the way. I played it on launch and I went through it no problems. My PC was like even mid-tier and loved it, right? But man, that is vicious on creativity. It's like, it's absolutely vicious psychologically. People alone, isolated, do this to themselves too. Like for example, you're performing so well and then one day you have an off date. If the greater or more consistent you performed, the worse those days feel. It's a matter of psychology, I suppose, if I am so bold. I'm not an expert in psychology or anything like that. It's just using the the foundations of the human condition to explain things, right? When you're incredibly consistently improving and then you have an off day, is incredibly emotionally off-putting. Instead of being in a state where you're underperforming, overperforming, you know, like your expectations are like, oh, I have off days and I have good days. And then when you have off days, there will be good days. But if you're consistently hitting a gold standard and you're too big to fail, and when you fail, ooh, that's a double edge. I personally would not, as a creative person, I personally wouldn't want to live on that expectation. So every developer who sees a golden game that comes out and they're on cloud 9, they're thinking to themselves, in my opinion, well, our fans and our consumers understand that we tried something new and it isn't the Baldur's Gate 3 experience. It isn't the FromSoft Dark Souls experience. It's our experience that we want to give. Can you be so sure that even the people who buys their games understand what type of emotional or psychological predilection that they have. If you're a creative person, I'm probably just preaching to the choir. But if you're a person that consumes out of habit, then whenever you're upset that something doesn't taste good as the best things you've ever had, that's the type of people I'm talking about. And then when it comes to buying something, that is a reinforced feedback loop. When you buy something $30, and it exceeded all its value that you've ever expected, the next time you go and buy something that's $30, you could tell yourself, yeah, I experienced the best thing I've ever had, but you're still gonna feel like crumb. You're still gonna feel crummy. And that type of emotional dissonance is, I feel, the thing that drives most things nowadays. Where, oh my gosh, this is the best game ever. You're not thinking to yourself, realistically, I probably won't feel this way for a while in the future. So I might need to ground my emotional state so that I can be open-minded to buying something different. Usually that's not the case, because when you buy something, you don't buy something that you don't like, right? I like to say that when you buy something, you're not being creative. You're being pragmatic. You buy based on pragmatism. So if Lorien Games is knocking out of the park, you buy more Lorien games. If Larian is doing well, you continue to buy more Larian games. Games from Larian. Baldur's Gate was your best experience you've ever had before. You must continue to spend money on Baldur's Gate 3 related things. You're not going to take a risk and go buy the Witcher 1 remake? That ain't no Larian Studios. It's freaking CDPR. They're last week's news. Or last week meaning 2 years ago. But for me, I'm good on you. Maybe one day I'll play Baldur's Gate 3. I'll play it. Now I'm looking for something new. My next game is not going to be a D&D CRPG. When I played Neverwinter, my next game was PSO2 NGS. I'm looking for different things. But I am a minor representation of the human condition. I'm not a person who statistically benefits business models. As in, I want developers to take risks. The trade-off here is any developer that is already taking a creative risk, they benefit from the minority population, in my opinion. It's definitely less than 50% of consumers. Every indie game is targeting less than 50%, at least less than the majority of buying power. So I like indie games. I like publishers who I like publishers, long-standing developers that make new IP every time, but they always have to take the risks for me. So their publishers would not like that. Definitely not. As a businessman, I have to remember that the publishers want consistent revenue. But it's a selfish thing that I'm requesting. I want creative people somehow to be rewarded for taking creative risks. And that's only possible if the trend of consumerism favors creative risks. And so often influencers and reviewers would say, yeah, I love creative games where we can be laxed and understanding and tolerable and pay for creative risks. Yet emotionally, the vast majority of people, if they like something so much, they latch on to the gold standard, they're going to stay with the gold standard. for as long as possible, and they will become less and less tolerant of anything that strays away from the gold standard. Like, this game is garbage. It's not a Souls-like game, says the vast majority of gamers 6 years ago. Like, oh man, like, there's no way this developer can make a Souls game as good as FromSoft. And they would play it for like 1 hour and then refund it or something. Like, it already happened with remakes. Callisto Protocol, the Dead Space remake. Like, that already happens. Like, oh, you know, it's basically Dead Space, but it's like a budget Dead Space. Like, they don't have their, we used to have it, you know, there used to be others, right? A good example where creativity won, in my opinion, is Gran Turismo and Forza. The relationship between Gran Turismo and Forza. But there was a casualty in all this too. Mainly most of Codemaster stuff. So Codemaster did like Dirt Rally, Colin McRae, Rallycross, I think, series, and they became indie. So they usually just less lucrative, always self-publishing. So they try to remain true to their own stuff, but it's at the cost of being admired, being successful, and whatnot, right? Forza is top right now. Gran Turismo, not so much, but still okay, because closed ecosystem. Gran Turismo is Sony's darling and remains Sony's darling, and Forza remains Microsoft's darling. And Codemaster sticks with the PC. You can carve out non-competitive things. Anyway, it's a long digression. I wanted to digress about this because I played Neverwinter online, right? Let's just take it all the way back to why this is relevant. I played Neverwinter. I have absolutely no reservation to digress into this again so many times, because Baldur's Gate 3's success means that Wizard of the Coast is on cloud 9, and that floats Cryptic's Neverwinter as well. The downside to this is, if I was a popular, which I'm not, if I was a popular content creator, I would probably have to answer the question, why am I not playing Baldur's Gate 3? Or, better yet, this comment would be more relevant or occurring. Neverwinter, like, this isn't D&D. D&D is not a combat MMO. Why don't you play like a real D&D game, like Baldur's Gate 3? As much as the creators and developers love to be successful and continue to do their own thing, when you become mainstream, right? When you've become the big dudes that set standards, I think it's unfair to expect them to quell and communicate with their growing community. But generally speaking, they are somewhat the catalyst for the formation of elitism and gatekeeping. And gatekeeping is going to happen psychologically, whether unintentionally or not. And it's up to Larian to maybe learn, in my opinion, or adapt and compromise what happened to CDPR and FromSoft. Maybe like consolidate them. Because to this day, yeah, FromSoft is doing really well, but CDPR did incredible. But that didn't stop them from getting like unconditionally crucified for making a new IP. Is Larian gonna stick to making the same game forever? I don't know. As a creator, in my opinion, I hope to see Larian make other games. I want to see them make a game that resonates with me. I'm not the biggest D&D person, but I would love to see them make a cyberpunk CRPG. example would be like a Shadowrun. You know, like a Shadowrun CRPG. That'd be fantastic. It wouldn't be like necessary out of the box, but it would be like an IP switch, and they would have to take that risk for me, which is very selfish. But I love creative people for that reason. I love that we can talk about video games from different perspectives, like different things. But man, I'm so excited for Larian. Like I'm so excited for D&D lovers. But I'm also bittersweet about it because I really hope that when I go on Netflix, go on Hulu, I don't know, go to my favorite outlets, I don't see like a full screen of Western RPG D&D inspired content. It didn't stop me from consuming them. Like even the Lord of the Rings, like Amazon's Lord of the Rings foray, Amazon's 40K, like Warhammer foray, the rising resurgent popularity of World of Warcraft. I don't even play World of Warcraft anymore. But all of this affects psychological standards. Like Western RPGs are in, like really in. And Larian like just exploded to the top. Like they're like the GOAT now. Curious where they're gonna take it. I'm still looking forward to Witcher. I'm a little bit more invested in the Witcher universe. Heck, I might even say I'm more of a George R.R. Martin universe than the Dungeons and Dragons. I'm sorry, it's just like the order of how I was exposed to things, right? And then friends and situations and whatnot. But good for D&D community. Good for Neverwinter. Heck, like I'm gonna continue playing Neverwinter without even a second thought that there's any danger. I played this game for over 9 years, like the course of 9 years, right? Like my account is like, I don't know if I'm close to 20,000 hours. So on and off. I'm gonna seal it off with a very positive message for my digression. And I haven't prepared this essay very well yet, but I like to rehearse live here. The positive message is, it is a fine few in the, I would say I'm gonna give it 5 years. It is a fine time to be a fan of Dungeons and Dragons for the next 5 years, at least 5 years. So if you have any interest in Western RPGs, get on the bandwagon, man. Pick up Baldur's Gate 3. If you're not a fan and you don't know if you're a fan, try to be emotionally, like, here's one slight deep cut. If you're a fan of FromSoft Souls-like game, give Dungeons and Dragons a shot. You know? It's the next wave. It's gonna be a while before Souls-like fandom comes. Like, it's gonna be a while, if not any time, where FromSoft is gonna compete again and bring back Souls games in a light that Larian has done for D&D. So try to be open-minded to the next creative wave, I suppose. The creative standard. Because D&D is here to stay. Against, if you're not a fan of D&D, well, join me, I guess. And we can share our thoughts about all the alternatives, right? All the indie games that we enjoy. Just to throw another optimistic thing is, I'm happy that Sega is successful enough to continue, and it's big room, like, you know, the gaming industry is big enough to accommodate other types of games. And I spent the last 4 to 5 months straight, almost on a daily basis, playing a series called Like a Dragon, and I absolutely love it. So I'm not trying to also find the trying to sound like a doomsayer, while this can produce a lot of strain on creative freedom, video games, the gaming industry is far big enough to support more than one trend and more than one possible breakout hit. Like, and also just to dispel some stuff, a breakout hit doesn't necessarily contribute to a new trend. It seems like all the signs are pointing to that. But let's get a little bit of a reminder. One breakout hit 2 years ago was It Takes Two. That's an indie cooperative puzzle game. And I really thought there was going to be a shot where it would highlight others, but it didn't. So, because it was a one-off, it was one of those things like, no, we're going to stick to small scale stuff. The indie scene, like, you know, business people didn't say, yeah, this was it. This is the model. So all the things that I said now could technically be irrelevant. It's just speculation, you know. It's the likelihood of things to happen, things to keep in mind. That if your whole screen or the entire your entire Steam store is going to have trending CRPG games for the next 5 years, we'll revisit this discussion. But realistically, it's probably going to be a little in between. Like, CRPG is hard to be it's a very high barrier. It's a very nuanced genre that is not accessible. Kind of like at the beginning of our discussion, right? About Korean MMOs. It's still a very hard sell. Like, it is a big gate. That gate is really heavy to get into CRPG, especially D&D. So it might not become the, like, my mother loves D&D too. She's been playing for 3 months. That kind of talk. Like, it's hard. It's still a very heavy gate. Quite a heavy gate. Like, MCU got so, like, the Marvel universe got so accessibility knocked down that even now it's gone so long that it itself is also not accessible anymore. So it can hurt. It can psychologically prevent D&D from becoming this type of thing can also do the opposite. Unlikely to, but it can also enrich for the opposite, which the gatekeeping can get excelled to the point where it cannibalizes itself, which kind of happened with at the later stages. When the honeymoon period is over, you start developing gatekeeping. A great example is the Souls community, the largest Souls community. Like, they would, and the gatekeeping would be so strong that the community would unintentionally, I'm not going to say they maliciously go out and do that, but gatekeeping is often unintentional. It's an emotional defense, right? They would antagonize other games for their merits. So, like, oh man, this game isn't a Souls game. You should be playing Souls games. They're high quality games that reward aptitude, and yeah, this stuff is very natural gatekeeping. And I don't have to tell you, Dungeons and Dragons pedigree goes really far behind. The first gatekeepers out the door would be those who probably be thinking, I like D&D before it was mainstream. Personally, I find that type of feeling a little bit ironic, because the thing you love, isn't it always mainstream? Sorry, it's a little jab, but it's about microcosms. Gatekeepers often live in a microcosm, so they only think of I'm like, emotionally, it would cloud the logic that most things are mainstream if the scale is right. So if you only hang around with people who like Souls games, that constitutes mainstream in your perspective, because you're merely being exposed to the constant reinforcement that Souls games are great. So that creates danger in creativity for Baldur's Gate 3, like D&D games. It hampers creativity because you become thinking like we should integrate what makes the GOAT game good. So in the future, what do developers have to think about? They have to think about including 2 million lines of story. Like guys, you know, Larian have 2 million like literal scripts for their story. How much do you think we need before we like don't get criticized by our fans? Like, do you think our fans will understand that our game is like really different and we don't need like 2 million lines of script? You know, that kind of thing, and it will bleed into everything. Sorry. I just love talking about these things. It's so the more I talk about it, the more deeper cut it becomes. And I enjoy talking about the games I play and try to make it relevant to a bigger audience. Like I play this game for that reason. You know, the live service games, a whole nother big bag of worm, you know, like a whole nother can of worms. And I've been trying to figure out more succinct ways and less long drawn out ways of describing the challenges that consumers face and developers and publishers, right? But largely trying to ascertain to what creates dissatisfaction to the current consumers. And that may or may not be interesting to developers and publishers because I don't have knowledge privy to statistics that developers probably do. All these like open dialogues to me are very healthy for for people to make decisions, right? The whole goal of these type of dialogue is to encourage people to be open-minded, and when they become open-minded, I truly and earnestly believe that people are happier overall when they understand why they're upset, or how they're upset, or how they're being manipulated, or how they're gaslighting themselves, kind of thing. Like all that stuff. It really leads to just decisions that, I mean, the one big, really big hot take that I generally use to attract thoughts is openly choosing to be fearful, or openly choosing to take a leap of faith when you have the ability to do so, or openly being able to take a challenge that you can't possibly win and still feel okay about it. That kind of level of realization. So I often challenge people to dialogue that allows them to do that, because I think if you can do that, there's no concern that you'll find some happy resolution for whatever you want to do, in my opinion. So all that talk is just to give ideas rattling. I'm making no claims that I'm correct or incorrect about certain things. I rarely can predict the future. I dare say so that I like to meet someone who can actually predict the future. So I'm not implying I have any form of foresight that would make any of my comments today any more valid than the next person who has feelings and patterns that they work off of. But in the end, I was trying to one of my biggest motivation is I'm often on the side of the creator. Like, what I mean is, I'm often talking about a side that's underrepresented most of the time. Because it's interesting. Just like I'm on the side of trying to find value in a game that doesn't behave with common trends. I want to say I'm a hipster, but no, not really. There are many things that I am not a hipster because I want consistency in my life. So it's more of a balance, right? I'm not there's no to me, being a contrarian doesn't necessarily bring satisfaction, but it brings perspective. At the same time, the act of a contrarian is to have the object of being argumentative, which I'm not trying to anyways. More perspectives mean a more worldly view on things. It's still very sorry, I'm like smiling and having like a smirk on my face is because I was taking bets, right? Or I was betting with myself, basically. I was challenging myself, like, yeah, let's not accept that the standard sequel with a closed system is gonna get Game of the Year. Obviously, I'm talking about Nintendo and Zelda, right? And I had this conversation with my friend, my close friend, for a while. It's like, do you think the Zelda buff, how strong do you think the Zelda buff is when it comes to... And to me, when I was referring to the Zelda buff, I was thinking about how non-competitive it is, like how uncontested it is in its own right, which is worthy of merit and stuff. But then this happened. I'm like, man, even though they're both in their closed systems, usually they have one loose connection, and that's things like Game Awards. And it puts a smile on my face that when there's a year that's hotly contested, it's exciting for me as a consumer. To me, I desire that each year is hotly contested. And I want to also be smiling that as a consumer, all the consumers enjoy this aspect where they would like, yeah, they're gonna go out and play Zelda. Yeah, they're gonna go out and play Baldur's Gate 3. Yeah, they're gonna pick up D4, you know, Diablo 4. What else came out? Yeah, they're gonna pick up their Resident Evil 4 remake. Yeah, that came out this year too, right? So, all that stuff, but even no matter how intellectually inclined I'm, like, you know, want to say I am, realistically, I consume things with a priority. And so does most people, right? You have to make decisions based on priority in some way. So here's to the success of Dungeons and Dragons once again, and layering games with Baldur's Gate 3. I'm looking forward to watching people play it, or maybe like a montage of friends like backstabbing each other, role-playing backstabbing each other, or like doing goofy things. I don't think I myself have the commitment at the moment, the freedom of commitment to such a undertaking as having a serviceable deep dive into Baldur's Gate. I'm more of a deep diving kind of person, so if I can't perform the deep dive, like video games, I trust creative content creators to offer a deep dive for me to consume, masticate, ruminate, and brainstorm. And then, you know, other content creators. the creative space is my jam. I live a life being in the creative lane, so it's very romantic in my opinion. When I see creators duke it out. If there's any and if they're duking it out to offer me a product, I absolutely love it. Now, business doesn't really like that, obviously. If you're a business owner, it's tough. And I want to be as fair as I can to also the business owners. My family, made their, their rise to privileged status, I suppose, through the use of pragmatic business, right? Being pragmatic about business. And that side of me certainly would love if the world had an idealistic redistribution of resources to fund everything. But we have to keep in mind that business practices are inherently competitive. And in a competitive space, there are winners and losers. Larian is the winner here today. And maybe for the next couple years, actually. There's still one more title, you know? There's still one more title. Because FromSoft's Armored Core is being released later this year. So we'll see. 2023 is an exciting time for gaming. Like, being a gamer or someone who enjoys more than their selective bias, right? I'm not saying that you can't just be that guy who only likes a specific thing at the moment. But I am not one of them. So whenever I see so many games that has a competition for Game of the Year, it's so exciting. It's liking video games for video games. You can definitely be a FromSoft gamer. That's all the power. But I like games for games. I like the creative process. If every year is as this hot, I would have no end of things to say about video games. Without a doubt. I wouldn't even find... I don't know if I would even have enough time to talk about all of it. Or even consume all of it. Or be knowledgeable about it. Heck, I don't know anything about Baldur's Gate 3, to be fair. Just superficial stuff. I was only talking about the psychology and the business model. I said nothing about Baldur's Gate 3 other than the developers. I'm genuinely... The first thing I have to make myself aware of is the people who made it, the people who fund it, like all the people that make it possible. That's priority number one. And then the second take is generally the people who are consuming it. And then maybe one day I'll play the game, right? I'll be able to play the game and experience it and offer empathy. But at the moment, I can't empathize with any Dungeons and Dragons person because I have not played a Baldur's Gate game. Literally have not played a Baldur's Gate game. Not even 1, 2, or 3. Any of the BioWare titles. Just arm's length. I know their historical influence. I know the mechanical standards they set. I know who BioWare is, where they are now. I'm really invested in the creators. Because I empathize with the creators for the task of creating. It's tough. It sucks as well when you're confronted by a outperformer, an incredible I'm trying to think of an anecdote of my own self. The closest thing I can think of is like, for example, I went to graduate school, right, for my PhD in biology. But when you go to a graduate school, often you have to meet certain standards, right? Because it's a school. Schools are standardized. And that type of thinking legitimately erodes your mental stability. Like, it is the biggest challenge, one of the biggest challenges in anyone's life, is when you enter a standardized field of like anything you do. So when you enter graduate school, you officially entered into an organization, like a calling or a life's chapter that involves standardization. And that stuff can destroy a person. And if the standards are set by just like, if you just happen to be in the presence of someone who set a standard that everyone just implicitly cannot overcome, like think about, like psychologically overcome, you have to spend your entire life measured to that standard. And that's how I empathize with any form of creative process where you have to put yourself in the shoes of those who aren't the winners. Because for every winner, there are far more losers. But it doesn't have to lead to a antagonist, in my opinion. I'm being a little naive here, I suppose. It doesn't necessarily have to lead to a purely antagonistic relationship. Kind of that old cliche of friendly competition, right? Or maybe like friendly rivalry, so to speak, kind of thing. I hope this fosters that. Unfortunately, consumerism predicates on pragmatism a lot of times. Like pretty much 90% of the time, consumerism is predicated on pragmatism. And pragmatism does not have win-win situations. In fact, the whole idea of being pragmatic and being logical is that when something wins, another thing loses. Only sentimentalism, irrationality, and emotional intelligence can produce a situation where losing is winning, and winning could be losing, which is the part that I'm trying to appeal to. And I like to think that content creators and whatnot, influencers could see the fun duality and the poeticness of exercising the difference between pragmatic decision making and irrational decision making, because content creation and the success of content creators predicate on that faith alone, which is you hope that whatever you're creating is unique enough that there are people, the world is big enough to appreciate what you're doing, right? But then you start throwing in pragmatism through like multi-billion-dollar corporations or multi-million-dollar corporations, and then you start feeling the pressure that should you give up your creative liberties to embrace standards. And because video game is such a large business, in such a lucrative business sector now, business is what imparts that pragmatism. In fact, business is the most logical thing about the video games in general. It's really weird that that what I'm saying might sound very obvious when it doesn't involve things that you love, right? And what I mean by love, I mean like video games, things that you're interested in. But when it starts involving things that you don't like, you can behave very pragmatically. But when it involves something that you do like, it's easier to appreciate the duality of the human condition. You're willing to forgive the things you like. You're not willing to forgive, or tolerate things that you're not familiar with or don't like yet. So it's very logical that you wouldn't want to take risk on things that you're not familiar with. And if the thing you really love, everyone's telling you it's the best thing that's ever happened since sliced bread, then I don't blame you for thinking that nothing can be good as Baldur's Gate 3 right now, if you're a D&D fan. See where I'm going with this? Not even Neverwinter Online. So I begin to ask myself then, when someone comes in who, like, eventually, at one of these weeks, inevitably, I'm going to have to answer the question, why aren't you playing Baldur's Gate 3? It's a definitive D&D experience. It's like, you're right. Can you tell me about that experience? I would love to hear why you think it's the definitive D&D experience, because I would love to know. And then I can tell you why I'm playing Neverwinter Online at the moment, as opposed to playing D&D, Baldur's Gate 3, right? Oh, you know what? What the heck? Oh, I must have completed more than one stuff. Okay, so we're done with this tune after that long digression, right? Tune number 3. All right, as always, the third tune. We're gonna focus. Let's see how quickly we can get this done. And then we're gonna do a run of Demon's Web Pits. Or at least try. I want to do a Blade Master run because of the boon change, or like the Paragon change. It's time to refocus. I am looking forward to some of the people that I watched for a while as they're playing through Baldur's Gate 3. I want to see like the best moments. I want to see when like a friend role plays and backstabs another friend. The stuff that you would typically see in like tabletop RPGs and whatnot. That's what makes it entertaining for me. Like, I like the role-playing stuff.